do we turn our camera on or like off or like when we're talking, or do we only turn it on when we're talking? Or
you should leave it on the whole time.
oh,
If you can. Yeah.
Garage door.
You should also mute your computers. Hey everyone, this is Ernesto Morales. I am the Secretary Pro Tem of the Raza Unida Party, and today we're having our monthly Platica. It's also the beginning of Pride Month, and so we're going to be talking today about Chicana OX identity in the LGBTQIA community. And there's a number of people here who are going to have this discussion. And, you know, I want to encourage everybody who's listening to put questions that you may have in the chat or comments that you would have. So I'm going to have these sisters go ahead and introduce themselves, and we'll start with Vanessa.
Hi, what's up, everyone? Buenas tardes. Vanessa Bustamante, pronouns she, hers, ella, ellas, and I'm the Vice Co-Chair Pro Tem of La Raza Unida Party. I'm really excited to be here with all of you and discuss inclusion of our LGBTQIA plus community within our Raza community, right? And I'm here because I identify as queer.
Go ahead, Elba.
So hello, everyone. My name is Elba Mandujano. My pronouns are she, her, hers, ella, ellas. And I'm super honored to be participating in this conversation that really acknowledges and validates the intersectionality of being Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx, and queer. And I identify as both queer Chicana.
Thank you. And finally, Tanya.
my name is Tanya, and I'm also super honored to be here, and I identify as Chicana and queer as well.
Okay, I just want to correct myself from earlier. My name is Ernesto Morales, and I go by he, him pronouns. And so first, we have a number of questions that we want to go through. And so we'll start with the question. We're going to start with the easy one, right? How has colonialism and gender / LGBTQIA, how are colonialism and gender / LGBTQIA oppression linked in the Chicano community? Anybody want to take I told you we start with the easy one.
I can go ahead and start.
Okay, thanks.
So the way that I view it, you know, colonialism is one nation controlling another, right? For gain, and I think that's very linked to gender LGBTQIA oppression, the same way that it's linked to many other isms, right, and oppression. And I think part of that is because in supremacy, right, in order for one group to control another, you need to have a group of people in power, and then folks that are going to be oppressed, that are going to be the targeted group that the people in power will be benefiting from. And so colonialism works the very same way that gender oppression does, right? We have in gender, right, men being the cis men specifically being the folks in power, and then everybody else being the oppressed. And then LGBTQIA, we have straight, if you will, heterosexual individuals in power, and then LGBTQI being the oppressed. And so colonialism, you know, works in that same way, that you have people in power, and then you have other individuals that are oppressed, and it is in a way, right, to maintain power, right? Like you need to have people in power, you need to have people oppressed in order for a certain group to be in control, right? So if there is, if we say, right? LGBTQI people are different, or women or trans or non-binary folks are different, and they're less than, and they're the oppressed, then you get to control, right? Like what things look like, what the environment looks like, who succeeds, who doesn't, right? And so they're very linked in that way that they present themselves, and they show up in spaces in order to keep certain people in control and other people marginalized.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll go off of that, and I definitely agree with everything that Elba just mentioned. And I think part of that, that constant othering, right? And it's been for centuries, right? If you're not a white Protestant male, right, you are not you're usually not in power. You're seen as less than, right? And so as it relates, right, to our gender, right, or so for myself, I identify as a cis female, right? And when you have folks that are possibly non-binary or part of the trans community, that then for others, right, like the white Protestant males, that poses a threat, right, to them. So they want to continue, like Elba said, that othering of our community. And so for further oppressing us in different spaces, right? So you're not part of what the fabric of, this country was supposed to be made up on, right? Then we're going to continue to other you so that you never feel that you are part of this community, right? Because once we start, right, and as we notice with movements and with coming together in unity, once we start coming together in unity and we start, calling these things out and calling them out for what they are, then we start, as a collective being able to come into our power, right, within our collectives, right? But that is part of settler colonialism, is to keep us outside of this power and to keep us in that other spot for as long as possible and in any way, shape, or form possible.
Yeah, I think I just would add, and I put in the chat on Facebook for those who are listening or who are reading along. As a party, Raza Unida, the Raza Unida Party is currently in the process of rewriting its entire platform, right? Sort of bringing it up to date. There's been some work that's been done on it, but what we're really thinking about is, how do we reflect as a party, the profound changes, right, that have happened in the profound awarenesses that have grown in the Chicano movement over the last 40 years. And so one of our platforms specifically has to do with transphobia and homophobia, and how the party opposes those things, and the reasons that it does. And so I think you sisters are right. The basis of oppression in the way that we understand it is the othering of the individual, right? And so in the multitude of ways that happens. And so fighting that oppression, right, begins with really investigating how it is we unother people, how we recognize and see the humanity of someone else. Right? I was going to say of other people, but I don't want to say other, but of another person, right? How do we see their humanity? One of the other questions that got brought up is what would you say to those that say that Chicana X movement is anti-LGBTQ?
I think that's something that, I'm going to be honest with, I struggled with also in the beginning of my coming out process, is just because sometimes we do come from very traditional homes. We think that because, maybe our families are not accepting, or those that we've grown up with are not accepting, right? We then kind of clump everyone together. So like all the raza is not accepting, right? And so for me, it really was a process of exploration in the university setting, where I was part of Mecha and I was able to come together with other free spirits because at that time, that's what we were identifying as free spirits. Just because, and I will say this, I feel like there was always this division, right? Because the LGBT group on campus, the club or whatever, was always white. It was a lot of white students in these organizations, right? And so you never really, at least for me, I never felt like I really fit in there. And then within Mecha, you know, we didn't really have a lot of people at that time really coming out, only just a few, right? So it was being able with the other free spirits to kind of come together. And so one thing I will say is I think there's a lot of miseducation around that. I think that there are circles within our community that are accepting of our identities as, you know, for me, Chicana and queer, and you know, being able to go, you know, a lot now too, there's like underground spaces. There have always kind of been underground spaces, right? And that's another question, like, why do our spaces have to be underground spaces? But, you know, there are spaces where, you know, I'm from LA, right? And so in LA, there's spaces where you can go and dance like banda and rancheras and cumbia and, you know, be part of your culture, but also be part of the queer community. And so I think for me, I would say, one, that's a lot of miseducation. There are spaces. The thing is that I guess in earlier years, they were harder to find, right? Because you could also become a target in the world, right? And it's not just our people, you know, like, let me make that clear. Like, there is this constant misperception that like, it's just, you know, Raza that's like, you know, anti, you know, queer folks, LGBTIA, trans, you know, it's, you know, Raza, blah, 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 right? But there are a lot of hateful people in this world, and a lot of them are white too, you know? So, you know, it's not just us. And I would say, being, you know, for me, seeking out these different groups that I wanted to be part of and coming into La Raza Unida, right? And being able to have the privilege of serving on the central committee, you know, that is my ability to one, be, you know, be part of this re-education, right? And this education of kind of bringing history into, because, you know, queer folks have been here for a very long time. Trans folks have been in our communities, you know, forever. And so it's just a lack of education because people don't want to talk about it, right? And it's constantly, you know, even within us, sometimes we do other, right? But I wouldn't say that every space is like that. And so for me, I've been able to finally find my space with La Raza Unida, where I'm not having to be part of this group and that group and the other group and the fourth group. This is my group where I can come and be myself. And not only that, but I can also come in and inform, you know, the documentos that we're working on, our bylaws that we're changing, just the way, you know, we're restructuring our organization. I'm able to have, you know, an ability to speak and to be heard, and also to share knowledge, right? And that's really what it's all about. I think as we continue, you know, our work, and as we continue having platforms like this, we continue to share that knowledge with our community. We continue to invite, you know, questions and come to this place where we're understanding and where we're learning from each other, right? I think that's, you know, that's a common like misconception, I feel, is that like we don't come together to like discuss or like talk about things and share knowledge. And I feel like maybe that happens still in other places, but I do definitely feel lucky that I'm part of this space where I can come and, you know, be myself and share that knowledge and have discussions and implement, you know, like you're saying, like the platform, right, where we're able to put into these documents our statements of what we're going to stand up for and how we're going to stand up for these things, right, and for our people, because our people should have a place where they can come and be fully authentic and not have to share only one part of themselves.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I feel like that was a mic drop moment. So I don't know if to add to that, but but I definitely agree that, you know, not every space, right, is anti. I think it's a loaded question in itself. Like, is the Chicano movement anti-LGBTQ, right? Because the movement is so large, right? And so it's going to look very different depending on the space that you're in, right? And then how that environment impacts, right? The space that you're navigating and attending. And that's true for any movement, right? If you think about feminism, if we're talking about racism, if we're talking about all these different movements, right, it's the same thing. It really depends on who is helping create that space and what do they want to bring into that space. And so if you are, for example, right, the space is very intentional in creating a voice in the validation, right, of queer Chicanx folks, right? And so you're intentionally bringing that into a space. So, but if you're just saying like, let's just talk about our Chicano identity and how we show up without the other intersectionalities, it's gonna look very different. And so I think for me, right, I would say it depends, right? It depends what space, right, we're willing to create. And I say that because, one thing that I try to do now in the work that I do is instead of thinking like anti-racism or anti-racist or anti-LGBT, I try to conceptualize my work in thinking like, how is it pro, right? Like if that's what I need from the space or that's what I want, how am I making it pro LGBTQ, pro just the different identities that I want to present. But I definitely do agree with Vanessa that it really, there is spaces, right? Sometimes we just have to be intentional about creating those spaces.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. The intentionality of any process that we undertake, right? In thinking about, what does it mean? I mean, we they say hindsight's 20/20, right? So we have somewhat of a clear view of things that have happened before in the past. But what is the future, right? What is the future history that we're trying to write right now around these ideas? And I think it's particularly again in the Facebook chat, I dropped in also to some writings that we are doing around sexism, and really thinking about, what is the relationship between all of us. And sure, we're having lots of conversations about how we deal with the binary and, and the spectrum and all of that, but also too, at times really trying to imagine, what our politics are like when we are able to let that go eventually. You know what I'm saying? To let the binary go, to exist on the spectrum and to be able to, just to be human, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point about the intentionality. That's a really good point. Okay. I thought maybe somebody else might have some. There's more questions though. I think some of these questions are really good. I mean, I think building off of that idea of intentionality, right? I think we could probably even draw that out a little bit more. One of the questions that's in here is, how can other Raza support uphold our LGBTQIA Raza? And I mean, the intentionality is certainly one piece of it, right? But like thinking that through, I think, a little bit more and just sort of like teasing it out in different ways. I don't know. What do you all think? I mean, I can say from my own perspective as, a cisgendered male, that it's very important for other cisgendered men, particularly men who identify as straight, to confront transphobia and homophobia, and to confront it, aggressively, and to not allow it to exist in the spaces around them or the spaces that they operate in politically. right? That it's that this is that moment, right? Like we're always urging white people to expend their privilege on our part, you know, like be an ally, you know, all this other kind of stuff. Well, that's one of those moments where you have to expend your privilege on the part of other people, and really, you know, think about what that means. You know, I think anyways, I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the years. I'm getting kind of old now. And, you know, as I realize as the years go by, I'm just like, you know, this has to be dealt with, right? It has to be dealt with. It has to be extinguished. It has to be expunged, you know? And so I think that, you know, thinking like how we do that, I think is one of those ways to think about how you use your own privilege.
I think something that kind of comes to mind, actually, I just had a conversation with Elba last weekend about what kind of just came to mind right now. And one thing we talked about is like how important education is and taking the time to talk to each other, even within our own community, because you don't know how your ability to talk to someone, whether it's maybe not your own family member, but somebody else's family member that might see you as like, I don't know, somebody that, you know, sometimes I've had friends where like my parents look up to them. They're like, oh, you know, they did this or that. And, you know, you should try to do that or whatever, right? So I think if you have people who are willing to talk to other people within your family or within other families, I think that's really helpful, and having those continuous conversations, because, you know, unfortunately, our, you know, society has been pretty messed up. You know, I think when it comes to this whole othering, even within infiltrating, you know, small communities, or, you know, like folks from like low socioeconomic status, and like, you know, just the othering and the layers of the othering that continues to happen even within, you know, our, you know, Chicano or Raza community, right? And so I think about that and I'm just like, how often would it be great to, you know, for someone who maybe has this perception of being like a machista male, right? And this person is now having a conversation with an older señor about, you know, this topic. And, you know, then they're able to kind of see like, wait, okay, maybe they have a point here, right? And so, you know, like, unfortunately, sometimes it does take someone, you know, that you might identify with to have that conversation with you and to change your mind, right? Or to broaden your horizon, maybe not fully change your mind yet, right? But you're in that process now because this person has taken the opportunity to talk to you, right? Because how often, you know, has it happened, you know, even in our own families, right? Where like, we're just kind of, you know, talking, and then, you know, maybe a tia understands us a little bit better, and then you kind of get closer to that tia, right? And so it could just be as simple as that, right? Is being able to have these conversations with one another and not always leaving it or resting it on the shoulders of, you know, that queer person or that trans person or that gay person, right? You know, not having them have to constantly carry that burden of being the one at the family party to say, hey, you know, that wasn't right, you know, or hey, you know, let's talk a little bit more about why you think that way, right? So I would just say, you know, that's one way that we can support, like within Raza, like we can support one another. I think another way is, you know, doing what we're doing, right? With looking historically at, you know, the movimiento, and also making sure to highlight folks in our community that are putting in the work for the movimiento and bringing Raza together, and, you know, being part of the Chicano movement still, but also acknowledging our intersecting identities, right? So bringing folks to the forefront and to say, like, these are leaders that are, you know, leading the Chicano movement right now. We have leaders that are, you know, within different, you know, come from different intersectional identities, come from different places, different regions, you know what I'm saying? And so it's being able to also highlight these people and give them their props and their, you know, their representation, right? Like in these spaces. I think that's really important. And I think if we continue to do that, I think we will also see maybe, you know, more folks coming in and seeking, you know, organizations like La Raza Unida, where they're like, I feel like I love this. Like I saw this, you know, Platica, and I'm impressed. I've never been part of, you know, a Chicanx organization that has fully accepted me. And I just saw this Platica, and now I want to be part of this, right? So it's being able to also cultivate that in unity.
Yeah, I definitely love and agree with that. I want to kind of come back to a point that Ernesto, you mentioned at the beginning, which is how do I use my privilege, right? And I think that is super important as we talk about support, as we talk about allyship, as we talk about advocacy, like how do I use my privilege? I think oftentimes we, you know, it's kind of in us to kind of focus on our marginalized identities, right? But also it's just as important to reflect on our privilege and how do we use that, right? So I am a queer mujer, right? But I'm also cis. So how am I showing up for trans folks, right? And so it's important, right, to think about that, right? Like to think about that when you're thinking about support. I also think support looks different depending on the platform that you're navigating, right? So like Vanessa mentioned, like with your familia, right? Like being able to have those conversations, to break down, to translate. Oftentimes, many of us have to translate those conversations because our familias might come from might not have experience, right, or knowledge of supporting or being there for LGBTQIA folks. And that will look very different than if you're with a group of friends, right? And that might look very different if you're in the workspace, right? Because if you have, for example, if you are working in an environment where you have the possibility of hiring folks, how are you hiring, right? Are you creating space to hire LGBTQIA, right? Or folks with different intersecting identities? And after that, what are you doing to retain them, right? Because I think a lot of the times we talk about like, oh, we're hiring this person to have this token person, but no, what else are you doing, right? I think knowledge is very important. And so self-knowledge. So you know, doing your readings, doing your own research, right? Google has so much nowadays, right? But I think also just as important is when are you doing this work also when no one's looking, right? When no one's watching, because you know, in order to support, like you should support always, right? Not only when you think somebody's there, or not only when you think you're going to get something out of it, right? We should be supporting and showing up and doing the work all the time, right? Because then that's how we're going to create a supportive, strong foundation for LGBTQIP members.
Yeah, those are extremely good points. I mean, I think that it's like I was saying in the chat while you were talking, because it was making me think about it. I mean, it's the whole idea of making the workplace that you might be responsible for, or even that you work at, you know, in showing support at work, right? Because I mean, in the world that we live in, you have to have a job to survive. I mean, well, yeah, you have to have a job to survive, or you're completely dependent upon the charity of other people, you know. And so, I mean, thinking about how important that is, right, to be able to open up those spaces, and yeah, I mean, you talk about ways to use your privilege. I think that's also that's an important one. That's a big bat to swing, you know, and that's a huge thing that you can do for people. So one of the other questions that I thought was also really good, is and we have talked about it a little bit. Everybody here has kind of touched on it, but I think it would be interesting maybe to go into it a little bit more about have you ever felt a contradiction in identifying as Chicana? Well, would be Chicana I guess in this particular discussion, but it could be O also as LGBTQIA. And I know that we've touched on it and people have talked about different aspects of it, but I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about that, about the contradiction or the perceived contradiction.
So I guess I can talk a little bit about this. I feel like I kind of mentioned this earlier. I feel like at the beginning, when I was coming into my Chicana identity, I did sometimes feel contradiction just because I grew up in a very traditional Mexican household, and just hearing conversations within my household, it was like it wasn't allowed, right? Like you could not be queer and exist in this space, right? In this within like a Mexican identity, or embrace your culture, right? And for me, I think it really took a turning point when I was in college and I started seeing the broader, right, like understanding of what Chicano is, and like, the whole idea of like not being neither from here nor there, like never be like fitting in, right? And I was like, well, that also is part of my queer identity too, right? So there, at this point, I realized like they were intersecting. So while like I think the traditional aspects of like my Mexican culture, I felt were not, we're always at odds. It was really, I felt like my Chicana identity that helped me also solidify my queer identity, because I always felt like I was in, like Nepantla, right? Like you're just neither, like you're from nowhere, right? And so, really embracing also, Aslan and being from Aslan, right? And, having this identity that has been rooted in struggle, right? And I think of even just, identify as, I always have, as Chola as well, right? And so just the way, I've dressed and the way I have been able to, like I wasn't very girly for a very long time, right? And so for me, it was like my Chicana identity allowed me to wear Dickies and to, wear eyeliner and, wear tennis shoes instead of wearing, instead of wearing heels or like, different things like that. Like it was my Chicana identity that like taught me, about zoot suits, that a mujer could wear a zoot suit and like look firme, right? And she could own it, like, and she didn't have to, wear a dress, right? She didn't have to wear the heels. Like it was, I felt like more and more my Chicana identity was, for me, is what I saw was very, I guess, in the same way of like my Chola identity. It was this, I was able to be who I wanted to be without this convoluted idea of what a woman was in this society, right? Or what a woman had to be in this society. And so I really do feel like it was at the end, like what really rooted me, like it rooted me in my queer identity too, because I just felt like I could be masculine and feminine, and I don't think like even, what they say the American identity is, right? Like it doesn't allow for that. You're born into this family, it's either pink or blue, right? And so growing up, I was like, I always like blue. I don't want to wear pink. Like it's very uncommon when you see me like red pink, right? So like for me, it was like this ability to not have to be within a binary of what society, socialized me as, because I was born a certain way, right? And it even came with my attitude. I felt like Chicanas were stronger, like they were, able to verbalize and to speak up, right? And so I felt like even that, like it just also allowed me to come into like my entire identity. So I think in the end, they ended up working hand in hand. So I think Tanya might want to share on here because I know her and I discussed this getting ready for the presentation today. So I'll pop it over to her.
Sorry, I'm super shy. I'm so sorry for being quiet. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I would like super agree with everything Vanessa said. Like for me too, like growing up, like I think it was like, you know, in the household, especially because of like I think like everyone touched on it with the colonialism, like how colonialism has like just like has really like pushed like the like you know like the homophobia and like the transphobia and just like all the, you know, anti-queerness onto like, you know, our people and stuff. So growing up, I was really afraid of, you know, being or coming into like the truth of like who I was. And then so for me, it was very hard to accept that. And then I think even though I grew up in San Gabriel and by the San Gabriel, like San Gabriel Valley, and you know, that's like pretty Chicano. It's a pretty Chicano area. And we were never taught you know, what Chicano was. We were never really taught what these words meant, even though that's really what our history was. So we didn't really grow up saying what, you know, saying Chicano or sometimes we did, you know, there depends, but not so much because we weren't really taught that. It wasn't part of our, you know, wasn't part of, unfortunately, but it's something that, you know, it's something that I think that, you know, through like things like La Raza Unida, we could like reintroduce that into the community. So it wasn't something that I had in my upbringing, either one, like either Chicana or like the queerness. It was something that was like so repressed for me. But and then speaking to people like in the community, like other queer Chicanos, like they didn't have like, you know, that either. Like it was something that was so repressed. And I think it's just all part of like, I think it's like what everyone has already touched on. Like it's just part of like the colonialism. It's like, you know, it's like the tool of it's a tool of colonialism to just like, you know, to like create like spaces to like, you know, to just keep people like quiet and like marginalized and stuff. And it's like this is like another way to just, you know, other people. So it's like for all the like the like the queer people that I've met, they've like, you know, they've become like isolated and, you know, afraid and living in like fear, especially with their families and stuff. And they don't have like words or like language for it and stuff. So I think that's why things like La Raza Unida are so important, because it's like we're giving like that education and we're giving that language to the people. So yeah, hopefully like, yeah, I think with more things like this, like we can bring that to people, because I don't think a lot of our people have that like, especially like for the queer community, like we don't have that. And but we can bring that to people if we can like, you know, bring that education and stuff.
Yeah, I agree with what you both said. I would also like to add that you know, I think that one of the things that I know that I've navigated or a lot, or sometimes that I've struggled with, is entering spaces, and I think Vanessa, you said it at the beginning, that are only catering to one identity, right? And so sometimes that's hard, right? Because you have to be part of like 5-10 spaces sometimes, right? Just to kind of nourish every part of your identity, right? To feel whole. And so sometimes that can be very, very difficult in itself. I know that the majority of LGBTQ spaces that I've been a part of are white or white driven, right? Or have white agendas, or very often fail to incorporate intersectionality and in what how it looks like when you're a person of color, right? What it looks like when you're a Chicano. And I've been in spaces too where white individuals from like LGBTQ communities will be like, well, why are they creating a separate group? right? They want to be separated. Like they don't want to be with us. And it's like, nah, because you're not bringing anything into this space, right? That caters to their entire identity. And so very similar in Chicanx spaces that I've been a part of, right? Either whether it was Mecha or whether it was some sort of other organization where the conversation was, oh, you're queer? You don't look like it. Like, what am I supposed to look like? Right? Like, oh, you don't look like so because I'm cis, right? And because I present the way that I am, right? A woman, and it's like, oh, like yeah, you don't look like it. You're not wearing a rainbow. You're not, right? And it's like, this is just who I am, right? And so when we say these kind of things, right? As innocent as they may be, right? There's also this, we've created this environment where it's like, oh, that's like different, right? Like you're automatically like putting someone else in this like otherness or this, right? And so I think in going back to like our beginning conversation, right? This creating spaces are intentional, right? Like making sure that we are opening up the space, right? If this is what we want to create, for people to be able to fully participate as themselves, because, right, we have to participate in multiple spaces to just validate those different identities, right, that we have. And that can be exciting, but it can also be very draining, right, at the same time, because it's like, oh, now I have to go to 10 spaces just to validate my experience as one individual. And so yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting when people say things like that, because it really appears to me like they don't really understand how terrible they're being when they say things like that. Like I'm like, is this person being like super shitty on purpose right now, or do they not get it? And I think, you know, the more I think about it, the more it just occurs to me that it doesn't really matter if they, you know, mean to be crappy or not. You know, that they, well, number one, that they are, and that it's really kind of crappy that they're in these spaces creating those compartments like that, you know, because I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've really spent a lot of time talking about in, you know, the study group, the Raza Unida study group, and in other, you know, meetings, right? Is how do we like decompartmentalize the Chicano movement, right? So that and not to decompartmentalize it so that what we're doing is like downplaying or dismissing any single person's experience, right? Because I mean, I don't want my experience dismissed, you know, as a Midwest half-breed Chicano from Lansing, Michigan, right? Who grew up not, you know, in Aslan, like about as far from Aslan as you can actually get, you know. I mean, I don't want my experience dismissed or downplayed within the Chicano movement, right? But thinking about how we decompartmentalize all of that, so that actually what it does is it allows all of those experiences and all those identities and all those different ways of being Chicano to actually interact with each other, to like truly interact with each other, right? So that then we can say, okay, this is what the Chicano movement looks like, right? This is what it looks like when everybody is interacting with each other. Maybe not everybody's on the same page, but at least they're interacting with each other. And I think that, yeah, that's yeah. Anyways,
Yeah.
what you said, I was like, yeah, sorry, Vanessa. Go
No,
ahead.
it's cool. Sorry, I was cutting you off.
Yeah.
But I also would agree so much with what Elba just said, because, you know, also like for us to acknowledge here, right, we're three cis, you know, identifying women who identify as queer, right? We're not representative of the entire LGBTQIA plus community. So our experiences, the things that we've shared here today, is not representative of our entire, you know, Raza LGBTQIA plus community. You know, we're missing so many other perspectives, and which is why I say it's so important for us to come together, you know, to share our knowledge and to be in spaces together, so that, you know, we have all those multiple perspectives, right, from our community. And it can just even be experiences, right? So like, someone who identifies as a queer Chicana from a middle-class family, versus a queer Chicana from a low socioeconomic status, right? Like your experience is going to be completely different. And so, the same thing, like first generation, second generation, fourth generation, like the experience might be different. And so that's one like disclaimer too that I wanted to provide today, is that we're missing so many other perspectives from our, our Raza community, our LGBTQIA plus community in this conversation today, And so, I hope, my goal is like 1 year from now, as we, hopefully have this conversation again, or, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, when we're at the Congreso having a conversation, right? That we have, our siblings at the table, that we have all these different perspectives, because that is what's going to make the movimiento amazing. And that's what's going to move us forward, is having those perspectives of every single, intersectional identity within our community coming in and being like, and challenging within us, like, I think we're so like, we keep it like OG when we have conversations in our, knowledge circles in our study groups Wednesday nights, where we're like, oh, we challenge perspectives, we question things, and that's how you learn, that's how you share knowledge, And so if we don't have, like everyone from our community there presente, like we're never going to hear that perspective. So I think like that's definitely something I want to share, and acknowledge, like we are, 3 cis female identifying, Chicanas, right? So that is just like one perspective, right? From an amazing, huge community, right? That we're part of, like a larger community that we're part of.
As we get ready to wind down, I just wanted to throw it back to Tanya and Elba, if you had any sort of last thoughts or words that you wanted to share before we wrap up.
Yeah, I want to just echo what Vanessa said. I think it's super important, right, to think about the identities, right, that are being presented. I think also is as equally important that to be transparent about that, right? Like just like she said, which is, this doesn't represent everybody, right? Our experiences as individuals and our familias and our communities, right, will also impact how we present ourselves, how we show up in spaces. I know that, Ernesto, you said Lansing, Michigan. I was at Michigan State 2 years, right? And so I am born and raised in LA, and then I went to Michigan, and
when were you at Michigan State?
Culture shock. It was different for sure for me, right? So how I showed up in spaces was very different, right? Because there was times where it was like, oh, we can already see that you're brown. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Now you're going to add another identity. Whoa, there's a lot of diversity happening in one person, right? And so that looks very different. And so all of that stuff kind of impacts our experiences and the way that we show up. And when creating spaces, it's important to say, like, to ask, right? To reflect on who is not present, right? If it's not present, how do we make the space in the future so those folks are present?
That's right.
Because, we can't just be the voice of everywhere, right? We can't have a token for individual for all of the identity. And so I definitely wanted to say that. I also wanted to say thank you for having this space, right? This space is not often, it's not every day that I come into a space, right? And I'm able to talk about both my identities. And so it's super important, and I hope that that this space does continue, right? And you're able to just bring in more folks, and more folks are comfortable in stepping into their identities and being a representation for others, because representation does matter. Yes. And that's how we create change, right? When folks see that someone else is there's that connection, and there's that community, and those bonds are strong, right? In motivating us to just continue, being familia, right? And so yeah, thank you for inviting me into this space.
Yeah, same. I just want to say thank you so much for this for this, and yeah, hopefully maybe like with time, maybe you know what, I think we're building a lot, and I think we'll build more with time. I think with time we'll be able to build more, and maybe we could just I think maybe if we like ask questions, like think about like what is it that our siblings, like the siblings that we're missing here today, you know, what is it that they need, like what are their needs, um like just thinking about like those questions, like what are their like material needs, and then like doing that investigation, that then you know, maybe we could like have a better like build, like doing that like work and like building more with them like that, like we'll be able to like be able to build more with people, like yeah, or yeah, if that makes sense. I don't know. Like,
It totally
I
makes
think
sense. Yeah.
we'll,
It
I think we'll
totally
be
makes
able to
sense.
do it. I think we're already building. It's already happening.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. I think so too. Hey, I just want to say thank you all for letting me be a part of this conversation. And you know, thank Vanessa for putting it together. I really appreciate being able to be here and you know, share what I think and hear what you all are saying. You know, IRL and is it IRL, INL or something like that in real life. I was trying to be cool. It didn't work. There you go. Um, Anyways, yeah. So, you know, for those of you who are listening and who listen to this later, the Raza Unida Party has an online study group. It meets every Wednesday at 6 o'clock PST.
5 o'clock
5 o'clock
PST.
PST. I refused to say that right. It's consistent. It's 5 o'clock PST. Just email us on the Facebook page and we'll send you a job form so that you can sign up and get your name on the list. We have conversations like this every week. We're committed to building the Chicano movement. We're committed to building a political party. And I just want to stress that doesn't mean necessarily that we're committed to building a third party here in the United States, but that we are committed to building a political party that represents the Chicano Latino community, and you know, whatever the future of that may be, that's what we're debating right now among ourselves. And you know, we hope that you all will come and be a part of that. And so yes, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next month at our next Platica.